The sunlight shone through the crowns of the old oaks, casting bizarre shadows on the tomato beds. I weeded the last row and straightened my back, feeling a pleasant fatigue in my lower back. It was a good fatigue, the kind that comes after working with your hands, after the earth responds to your care with green shoots and strong stems. I am 70 years old, but working in the garden still brings satisfaction, even more than working in an insurance company office once did. I took off my gardening gloves and looked around my plot. Beyond the fence was the McVaber's house, and to the right were the spruce trees Harold had planted 20 years ago, when we'd first moved to Frankfurt. Those spruce trees were knee-high then, but now they rose above the roof. Time. It subtly changes everything, including people. 20 years ago, I never imagined that I would one day spend an afternoon in the garden talking to tomatoes and planning where to plant new currant bushes. Back then, life seemed to follow the same routine. 8 hours at the office, late nights in front of the TV, weekends with my family, plans for vacations and retirement. Harold worked for a municipality, a city planner, and we were an ordinary middle-class American family. Stable, predictable, content with our lot in life. Now Harold has been gone for 8 years. The house seems too big and quiet, except for the days when Esmeralda and her husband come to visit. However, my daughter's visit ceased to be a joy about a year ago, or maybe even earlier, but I didn't realize it right away. I sat down on the bench under the apple tree and rubbed my aching knees. Esmeralda had gotten married 3 years ago, at the age of 32. It had taken her a long time to find the right man, and I was beginning to worry that my daughter would be alone. Men her age were either married or had children from previous marriages, or were unserious types who weren't ready for family life. Barnabas came into our lives as a gift of fate. 36 years old, never married, works as an inspector for the state health department, has his own apartment, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, is polite to the elderly. Esmeralda met him at some professional seminar. She works as an accountant at a hospital, and their areas of expertise overlapped. For the first few months of their relationship, I watched my daughter's transformation. She lost weight, started wearing brighter makeup, bought new clothes, joined a gym. Her eyes shone. She was always smiling, talking about her plans for the future. Barnabas also made a pleasant impression. He brought me flowers, was interested in my health, helped with minor repairs around the house. He was attentive, gallant, and I was sincerely happy that my daughter finally found a worthy man. The wedding took place modestly, in a small family circle. Barnabas explained it by the fact that he had almost no relatives. Parents died, no brothers and sisters. A few distant cousins live in other states. Esmeralda didn't mind the simple ceremony. She was so in love that she didn't need lavish celebrations. It was enough for her to simply become the wife of the man she loved. The first alarm bell rang about 6 months after the wedding. Barnabas came over for a family dinner, and while Esmeralda was helping me in the kitchen, he stared too intently into the living room. I noticed it by accident when I looked out of the kitchen. He stood in the middle of the room and slowly turned his head, studying every detail of the interior. His gaze lingered on the antique secretary I'd inherited from my grandmother, then moved to the antique clock on the mantel, to the heavy gilt-framed paintings, to the Persian rug. I thought at the time that he was just interested in antiques or gauging our taste. Many people like to look at other people's homes, compare them to their own, dream about how they would furnish such a space. But something about the look on Barnabas's face made me wary. It wasn't the look of a curious guest. It was the look of a man mentally assessing the value of the property. Then he started asking about the history of the house. When we bought it, how much we paid, how the neighborhood had developed over the years, what the value of similar properties in Frankfurt is now. His question seemed natural, a young couple thinking about buying their own home, wanting to understand the market exploring options. Esmeralda was even pleased that her husband was taking such a practical approach to the family finances. Barney is so forward thinking, she told me after one of these conversations. He thinks we should be saving for a down payment on a mortgage. He wants to buy a house in a good neighborhood so our kids have the right environment. But I worked for an insurance company for 30 years, and I've learned to read people. I saw hundreds of clients who tried to defraud the company, overstate damages, hide important information. I knew what sincere interest looked like and what self-interest looked like. Barnabas looked at my house not as a potential buyer of a property in the neighborhood, but as someone who already considered the house his own. The third alarm bell was his persistent inquiries about my health, not out of concern for my mother-in-law, no. Barnabas was interested in very specific things, whether I remembered to take my medication, whether I was confused about dates, whether I lost things, whether I couldn't remember where I had put important documents. He asked these questions as if, by the way, in the course of normal conversation, but I noticed how attentively he listened to my answers. Mom, you really need to pay attention, Esmeralda said when Barnabas brought up my alleged memory problems. At your age, it's important to look after yourself. What if you forget to turn off the gas or lose your keys? And Barnabas would nod with a look on his face as if he'd already made a plan of action in case I was incapacitated. Sometimes he even pretended to be concerned for my safety. Valori, maybe you should think about installing an emergency call system or getting a caregiver to come in a few times a week. I'd always said I was doing fine on my own and didn't need any extra help. But I could see my son-in-law's face darken at my words. I got up from the bench and headed toward the house. The white two-story mansion with its green roof and wide porch looked solid and well-maintained. Harold had always been proud of the house. We bought it in 1998 when Esmeralda was 10 years old. Real estate prices in Frankfurt were much lower then, and we were able to afford a house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room, dining room, study, and a large lot. Esmeralda grew up in this house. Every room held memories of her childhood and adolescence, how she learned to play the piano in the living room, standing on a stool to reach the keys, how Harold and I helped her with her homework at the dining room table, how she prepared for prom by twirling in front of the mirror in her pink dress, how she brought her first suitors to the house, while my husband and I pretended not to overhear their conversations. Every New Year's Eve, we decorated the Christmas tree in the living room. Every Esmeralda's birthday was celebrated in the dining room, setting a festive table on the finest tableware. Every summer we had a barbecue in the backyard, inviting friends and neighbors. This house was more than just real estate. It was our family history, the place where the best years of my life were spent. Barnabas knew the value of this house. At current real estate prices in Frankfurt, it was worth at least $450,000, and maybe more. The neighborhood had become more prestigious in recent years, opened a new school, built a park, reconstructed the main street. For a man with a modest civil servant's salary, it was a fortune, and I could see the greed in his eyes every time he crossed the threshold of my house. At first, I thought I was wrong. Maybe Barnabas is really just a curious man who is genuinely interested in his wife's family history. Maybe he asks health questions out of genuine concern for his elderly mother-in-law. Maybe I've become suspicious in my old age and attribute bad motives to people where none exist. But as time went on, my son-in-law's behavior became more and more intrusive and transparent. He began to show up at my house without Esmeralda, on various pretexts. That he needed to urgently pick up some documents for his wife. Then he decided to check how things are at the mother-in-law, then wanted to help with minor repairs, then brought something from the store, and each time his gaze glided through the rooms with the same appraising greed. He studied my house like an expert appraiser. He looked in the closets under the pretense of finding tools, examined the books in the library, wondered about the contents of the dining room buffet. One day, I caught him in the bedroom, where he stood in front of the dresser looking at the pictures on the wall. "I'm looking for aspirin," he explained without embarrassment. "I have a headache." "There's aspirin in the medicine cabinet in the bathroom," I replied coldly. "Yes, of course. I'm sorry. I thought you might have a supply in the bedroom." I didn't know then what he was really looking for, but now I realize Barnabas was trying to find out where I kept important documents, valuables, family savings. He was inventorying my possessions and figuring out how to get to them. I entered the house and went into the kitchen. I turned on the electric kettle and pulled my favorite cup out of the cupboard, a white porcelain cup with blue flowers, a gift from Harold for our wedding anniversary. The house was silent, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock in the living room and the sound of boiling water. Last winter there was an incident that finally convinced me that my suspicions were justified. It was February, there was snow outside, and Barnabas came to see me on a day when Esmeralda was working late. He said he'd seen the weather forecast for a big snowstorm, and he wanted to help me clear the paths before the snow got too deep. I thanked him for his concern but said I could do it myself. I had an electric shovel and the paths weren't that long, but Barnabas insisted, saying he couldn't let an old woman do such heavy work. In the end, I agreed to help. But instead of going to the barn to shovel, he went into the house, threw off his shoes, and settled into a chair in the living room. When I asked in surprise what he was doing, Barnabas said he wanted to rest first and talk to me about important things. And so it began. Barnabas started asking me about my will. Did I have one, who I had named as heir, where I kept the documents for the house? Did I have bank deposits, securities, insurance policies? He talked about it as if it were a matter of course. A son-in-law has a right to know the family's financial situation. "Valerie, you see, at your age, it's important to have all the documents in order," he said, leaning forward and looking me straight in the eye. "What if something happens? Esmeralda would panic, wouldn't know what to do, where to find the papers. It's better to talk and prepare everything in advance." I answered evasively, saying that my attorney Reynolds had all the papers, that the will had been drawn up, and that all the necessary arrangements had been made. Barnabas frowned and tried to insist, but I told him firmly that the conversation was over. That was the first time he was openly rude. His voice hardened and his eyes flashed with anger. "At your age, Valerie, you should be thinking of your family's future, not clinging to the past. Esmeralda is your only daughter, and she has a right to know what awaits her. And I, as her husband, must understand the family's financial situation. Esmeralda will know what she needs to know when the time comes," I replied. "In the meantime, my property is my own business." Barnabas tried to press me for a few more minutes, talking about family obligations and mutual responsibility. But I stood my ground, and finally he left without touching the snow shovel. Since then, I've been watching my son-in-law more closely, and what I saw I didn't like at all. Sunday lunch began as usual at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Esmeralda arrived with a pot of homemade soup and fresh rolls from the bakery on Main Street, and Barnabas brought a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums and a bottle of red wine. He kissed me on the cheek, as he always did when I met him, and gallantly helped me take off my daughter's coat. "Valerie, you look lovely tonight," he said, eyeing my dark blue suit and pearl earrings. "That color suits you very well." I thanked him for the compliment, though I knew it was just a courtesy. Barnabas always said the right thing at the right moment, but there was never any sincerity in his voice. He was like an actor who plays the part of a caring son-in-law flawlessly, but sometimes forgets and shows his true colors. We went into the dining room, where I set the table on the best tableware. snow-white tablecloths, china plates with gilded rims, silverware that I had inherited from my mother. Barnabas, as always, surveyed the table setting. His gaze lingered on the antique silver, and I could see him mentally calculating the value of the cutlery. "What an exquisite set," he said, picking up a fork and examining the branding on the handle. "Antique silver is very valuable these days. It must be worth a fortune." "It's a family heirloom," I replied, pouring the soup into plates. "My mother received this set as a wedding gift from my grandmother." "Yes, family traditions are fine," Barnabas agreed, but I could hear a note in his voice that said something else. "But it's also important to think about the practical side. Antiques require special care, insurance, and in the event of, well, unforeseen circumstances, such things can become a burden to the heirs." Esmeralda, pouring wine into glasses, raised her head. "Barney, what unforeseen circumstances? Mama is well." Of course," Barnabas agreed hastily. "I'm just thinking about the future. Inheritance planning is a smart move that makes life easier for the whole family." He turned to me with a disarming smile. "Valerie, you do realize I'm saying this purely out of concern for you and Esmeralda. When all the paperwork is in order, when there's a clear plan, it removes a lot of problems. People often put off such matters, and then their relatives get into difficult situations." I stirred the soup in my plate in silence. Barnabas started talking about inheritance again, as he had done several times in the last few months. Each time he approached the subject from a different angle. He talked about inheritance taxes. He told me stories about people he knew who had encountered problems after their relatives died, and he advised me to consult a financial advisor. "You know, we had a situation in our department last week," Barnabas continued, cutting off a bun. "One of the inspectors had an aunt who died and left a house in a nice neighborhood, but the will wasn't made correctly, and now the family has been dealing with lawyers for 6 months, spent more on lawyers than the house is worth." "My will was drafted by an experienced lawyer," I said. "Mr. Reynolds has been handling our family's affairs for 20 years. "Oh, Reynolds is an excellent lawyer," Barnabas agreed. "But laws change. There are new tax breaks, new opportunities for optimization. Maybe we should reconsider some of the points." Esmeralda put aside her spoon and looked at her husband. "Barney, let's not talk about such gloomy things at dinner. Mom's not gonna die anytime soon." "You're right, dear," Barnabas agreed quickly, but I could see the corner of his mouth twitching in distaste. "I just wish we had everything under control. The family needs to be protected from the unexpected." He turned to me again. "Valerie, have you thought about putting Esmeralda in a power of attorney? In case there's an emergency and you're not around to take care of it." "What kind of emergency?" I asked. Various. Banking, real estate, medical decisions. At your age, anything can happen." "At my age," I repeated. "Barnabas, I'm 70 years old, not 90. I'm perfectly capable of handling things on my own." Of course," he agreed again. "But power of attorney is just a precaution, an insurance policy in case of emergencies." I didn't like the way he used the word contingency so often. I had the impression that Barnabas was hoping for, or even planning to provoke, such contingencies. After the soup, I served fried chicken and vegetables. Barnabas began again to praise my cooking skills, but I could see that his attention was not on the food. He was furtively looking around the dining room, studying the paintings on the walls, glancing at the antique sideboard in the corner. "Valerie, is this sideboard a family heirloom too?" he asked casually. "Yes, it was my grandmother's." "Beautiful work," said Barnabas, getting up from the table and approaching the sideboard. "19th century?" "About," I said, watching him as he examined the carved details of the doors. "These things are very expensive these days, especially if the original hardware is still intact." He touched the antique knobs and locks. What does it hold? Holiday dishes, tablecloths, napkins. Don't you keep documents here? Barnabas asked casually. What kind of documents? Well, all sorts of things. Insurance policies, bank statements, maybe some securities. Esmeralda looked at her husband in surprise. Barney, why do you want to know where Mom keeps her documents? I'm just curious, Barnabas shrugged. You know, in my job, I often have to deal with situations when people lose important papers or forget where they put them. I want to make sure that Valerie is all right. He went back to his desk, but I noticed that his gaze kept returning to the sideboard. It was as if he were planning how and when he could examine its contents more closely. Mother, do you really remember where all your important papers are? Esmeralda asked suddenly. Of course I remember. I was surprised. What makes you doubt it? Nothing in particular. It's just that sometimes I think you've become more absent-minded. Last week you spent half an hour looking for your glasses, and they were on your head. I looked at my daughter, then at Barnabas. He had a look of sympathetic concern on his face, but there was a twinkle of satisfaction in his eyes. Esmeralda, I said slowly, you have never complained of my absent-mindedness. Why do you suddenly have such thoughts? The daughter was embarrassed. Well, Barney sometimes says that you should keep a closer eye on your elderly relatives, that the first signs of memory problems often go unnoticed. I see, I said, and looked at my son-in-law carefully. Barnabas, do you often discuss the state of my health with your wife? We just take care of you, he answered. It is natural for a loving family. But I heard something unnatural in his voice. Barnabas spoke too smoothly, too correctly, like a man who had rehearsed his answers in advance. The rest of the dinner passed in a strained atmosphere. Barnabas continued to play the caring son-in-law. Esmeralda talked about her work, and I watched them in silence, thinking about what was happening in my family. My daughter was gradually becoming my husband's ally against her own mother without even realizing it. Barnabas was skillfully leading her to the right thoughts, making her doubt my ability to act, preparing the ground for future actions. After dessert, Esmeralda went to the kitchen to wash the dishes, despite my protests. Barnabas stayed with me in the dining room and spoke again about the documents. Valerie, I realize you are uncomfortable discussing such things, but think of Esmeralda. She is your only daughter, your only heir. Wouldn't it be better if she knew in advance what she'd have to deal with? Esmeralda will know everything she needs to know in her own time, I repeated. And if there is no time? Barnabas's voice had a hard edge to it. If something happens suddenly, then she'll be alone with all her problems. But she's not alone, I said, looking him straight in the eye. She has a husband, so caring, so thoughtful. Barnabas was confused for a moment, but he pulled himself together quickly. That's why I want to help, to protect Esmeralda from unnecessary complications. At that moment, his daughter returned from the kitchen, and Barnabas instantly changed the subject. But I already realized that the game had begun in earnest. The next 2 weeks passed quietly. Barnabas and Esmeralda didn't show up, citing work and household chores. I was glad for the respite. I had a chance to think calmly about what was going on, to analyze the behavior of my son-in-law and understand where he was going. But on Wednesday evening, when I was watering the flowers in the garden, Barnabas's car stopped at the gate. He got out alone, without Esmeralda, and came toward me with a broad smile on his face. Valerie, good evening, he called out as he came through the wicket. What a beautiful garden you have. Those roses are gorgeous. I turned off the hose and turned to him. Hello, Barnabas. Where's Esmeralda? She has a refresher course today. She'll be late. I thought I'd stop by and check on you. It's been a long time. There was the usual ostentatious concern in his words, but I knew that visits without his daughter always had a special purpose. Barnabas never wasted time on mere small talk. Come into the house, I said, taking off my gardening gloves. Would you like some tea? I'd love some. We went into the kitchen and I put the kettle on. Barnabas was seated at the table, looking at the kitchen with exaggerated interest. His gaze lingered on every detail. The antique copper baking molds on the shelves, the vintage dishes in the glass cabinet, the ceramic pots of herbs on the windowsill. It's very cozy, he said. It feels like generations of the same family have lived in this house. There are traces of history and family tradition everywhere. Yes, Harold and I have tried to preserve what we inherited from our parents, I said, pulling cups from the cupboard. How long ago did you buy the house? In 1998. So it's been yours for 27 years, Barnabas said. It must have gone up a lot in price. I poured the tea and put the cup in front of him. Why are you interested in the value of the house? Just curiosity, Barnabas shrugged. Esmeralda and I are thinking about buying our own place. We are studying the market. I want to understand how prices are formed in different neighborhoods. But what I saw in his eyes was not the curiosity of a potential buyer, but a different kind of interest. Barnabas evaluated my property from the practical point of view of a person who expects to dispose of it someday. Where are the deeds to the house? He asked, sipping his tea. Why do you want to know? Well, anything can happen. Fire, theft, natural disaster. Important documents should be in a safe place. Maybe we should make copies, put them in a safe deposit box. I looked at him silently, and Barnabas must have realized he was in too much of a hurry. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry into your personal affairs. It's just that at work I often have to deal with situations when people lose important papers and then can't prove their rights to property. My papers are in perfect order, I said, and kept in a safe place. Of course, of course. Is there a will, too? It wasn't the first time he'd asked me that question, and each time I'd answered evasively. But today, I decided to check his reaction for a more definite answer. Yes, there is a will. The whole house and all the property is left to Esmeralda. Barnabas's face lit up with a faint smile of satisfaction, but he quickly pulled himself together. That's right. Esmeralda is your only daughter, your rightful heir. The only daughter, I agreed, but not the only possible heir. Barnabas was wary. What do you mean? I have nephews, children of my late brother. We keep in touch, correspond, meet at family gatherings. That wasn't true. My brother died childless, and I really had no other close relatives. But I wanted to see how Barnabas would react to the possibility that the inheritance might go to more than just his wife. But the daughter has priority, he said, and I could hear the worry in his voice. Any heir can be named in the will. The law allows it. Barnabas gloomed. He had not expected this turn of events. Valerie, but it is not fair to Esmeralda. She cares for you, visits you, helps you, and some distant relatives. My nephews take care of me too, I interrupted. They call me every week, congratulating me on holidays, asking about my health, and they never ask about the value of my house or the whereabouts of my papers. Barnabas realized that the conversation was taking an unexpected direction and tried to return to safe territory. I ask about the documents only out of concern for my family. I want to make sure you're okay. What could be wrong? Well, for one thing, the will could be out of date. Laws change. There are new paperwork requirements. Maybe you should show the document to a modern lawyer. Make sure it's done correctly. I see where he's going with this. Barnabas wanted not only to know the contents of the will, but also to be able to influence its modification. Perhaps he planned to find some formal irregularities in the document and use them as a pretext to demand that the will be rewritten. My will was drafted by an experienced lawyer, I said. Mr. Reynolds knows the ins and outs of the law. Yes, Mr. Reynolds is a good lawyer, Barnabas agreed, but he's a little old. Younger lawyers are more familiar with modern tax breaks and new ways of handling inheritances. He leaned forward with a persuasive tone in his voice. Valori, I know an excellent lawyer who specializes in inheritance law. He's young, energetic, up to date on all the latest developments in the law. Maybe you should consult with him. Why would I consult with an unfamiliar attorney when I have a trusted lawyer? Just to get a second opinion, to make sure the will is drafted in the best possible way. And then this lawyer could explain to Esmeralda all the legal intricacies, prepare her for future procedures. Now I finally understood his plan. Barnabas wanted to bring in his own man who would help him gain access to information about my estate and perhaps convince me to make some changes in my will in favor of my son-in-law, or find a way to declare me incompetent and gain control of my property through my wife. Barnabas, I said slowly, why are you so interested in my financial affairs? He tried to act surprised. Why? We are a family. I care about Esmeralda's well-being, which means I care about your well-being too. So you think you have a right to know the details of my inheritance? Not a right, but, well, a natural interest. Esmeralda and I are planning for the future. We want to know what we can expect. There it is, the true face. Barnabas was already planning the disposition of my property, calculating its value, thinking about how to use it, and he's made no secret of it, believing he's entitled to it as the husband of the sole heiress. And what exactly are you counting on? I asked. Barnabas realized he'd said too much and tried to correct himself. We're not counting on anything. We just want to be ready for any eventuality. What kind of circumstances? Well, for whatever circumstances may arise in the future. He didn't mean to say the words about my death or incapacity, but his meaning was clear. Barnabas was waiting for the moment when he could take possession of my house, and he was preparing for it in advance. I got up from the table and began to clear the cups. Barnabas, I'm afraid you're going to have to wait a long time for those circumstances. I feel fine, and I intend to live for many more years. Of course, he agreed hastily. I didn't mean anything bad by it. I'm just thinking about the future. But there was anger in his eyes. I suppose Barnabas had expected that at 70, I should be more docile, more dependent on my relatives for help. Instead, he found himself dealing with a sensible woman who wasn't going to give up control of her property willingly. He tried for a few more minutes to get the conversation back on track, asking about my plans for repairs, about the state of communications in the house, about whether it was hard for me to cope with such a large household. But I answered evasively and gradually made him realize that it was time to end the visit. As I walked Barnabas to the gate, I thought that his patience was at an end. He'd been looking at my house for 3 years now, studying my financial situation, preparing the ground for his inheritance, and the longer I resist his plans, the more aggressive his actions become. Today's conversation has shown me that Barnabas is ready to take more active measures. He is no longer content with hints and cautious questioning. He's demanding access to my documents, imposing his lawyer, trying to convince me to revise my will, which means he's about to do something more serious. Saturday morning, Esmeralda arrived alone. It was rare. Usually Barnabas never let his wife go to her mother's house unaccompanied, always finding a reason to go together. But this time something was different. Her daughter looked tired and preoccupied, dark circles under her eyes, and her usually neat hair was a little disheveled. Mom, can I stay with you all day? She asked without even saying hello. I need to be quiet to think. I put my arm around my daughter and felt her shoulders tense. Of course you can. Where's Barnabas? He's playing golf with his coworkers. He said he wouldn't be back until tonight. We went into the kitchen and I put the coffee on. Esmeralda sat at the table and stared blankly out the window at the fall garden. The yellow leaves swirled slowly in the air, carpeting the paths with a golden carpet. She usually loved this time of year, often saying that autumn in Frankfurt was especially beautiful. But today, all the beauty of the world seemed to have passed her by. Esmeralda, what's wrong? I asked, pouring coffee into cups. My daughter was silent, twirled the spoon in the cup, then looked up at me tired eyes. Mom, have you ever felt that you do not know the person with whom you live? The question sounded so sudden that I was confused for a moment. Esmeralda never complained about married life, always portraying a contented wife who was happily married. What do you mean? Well, when your husband seems to be acting strange, saying one thing and doing another, and you don't know what's going on in his head. I sat down next to my daughter and took her hand. Tell me what's bothering you. Esmeralda was silent again, gathering her thoughts. Then she spoke slowly, as if each word was difficult for her. In the last few months, Barney's been different. Different. He's always talking about money, about real estate, about the importance of planning for the future, and he's always asking me about you. What kind of questions? About your health, how you're doing at home, if you remember where you put things. And then he draws some strange conclusions. He says that at your age, you should be more attentive, that relatives should help elderly people make important decisions. I listened attentively, not interrupting. Finally, Esmeralda told me what was going on in her family, not hiding the real problems behind polite phrases. What else alarmed you about his behavior? He's become very interested in our family affairs, constantly asks about your house, whether you bought it long ago, how much it might be worth now, and always adds that we as a family should be thinking about the future, planning for an inheritance. Esmeralda sipped her coffee and continued. Last week he brought home some pamphlets about inheritance taxes, about how to properly make wills. Said he'd picked them up at the office from a lawyer their department works with, and he suggested you meet with that lawyer. He told me that, I said. And what did you say? That I had my own lawyer and didn't need any additional advice. Esmeralda nodded. Barney got angry when I told him about it. He said you were too stubborn and didn't want to accept family help. And he said that at your age, people often become suspicious and stop trusting people close to them. Now I understood where my daughter had gotten her doubts about my competence. Barnabas methodically impressed upon his wife the idea that her mother was growing old, losing her judgment, and in need of care. He was preparing Esmeralda for the fact that she would soon have to take over the care of her incapacitated mother. Esmeralda, do you think I'm not thinking straight anymore? My daughter looked at me carefully. No, Mother, you are the same as ever. Maybe a little more cautious in conversation, but that's normal. A lot of people become less open with age. Then why are you listening to Barnabas? I don't know, Esmeralda admitted. He speaks so convincingly. He gives examples from his work. He tells stories about families who have faced problems. And gradually you start to think, what if he's right? Maybe I'm missing something. She got up and walked around the kitchen. Mom, do you remember what Barney was like when we first got married? Attentive, caring, always interested in what I was doing, what my plans were. And now it seems like he's only interested in one thing. And what's that? Your house, Esmeralda said quietly. He talks about it all the time. He talks about how it's a big responsibility, how it's hard for you to manage, how you should think about selling it or giving it to your children. She came back to the table and looked me in the eye. Mom, he even suggested that I talk to you about putting the house in my name. He said it would avoid taxes and make things easier in the future. And what did you tell him? that I wouldn't discuss such things with my mother unless my mother wanted to talk about it. He got very angry. He said that I didn't understand the realities of life and that I was only thinking about immediate desires, not the long-term interests of the family. Esmeralda lowered her head. After that conversation, he hardly spoke to me for days. He came home from work gloomy, ate dinner in silence, sat in front of the television. Then suddenly, he became affectionate again, brought me flowers, said he didn't want to upset me. I recognized in this description a classic technique of the manipulator. First, punishment by silence and coldness, and then return to the previous behavior, so that the victim understood that the conflict can be avoided if you behave obediently. What else bothers you about his behavior? He started to control our spending. We used to talk about big purchases, and we would do the small things on our own. Now he demands accountability for every dollar we spend, and he's always talking about saving money, saving for the future. Esmeralda stood up and went to the window. Last week I wanted to buy new curtains for the bedroom. The old ones are faded and they look unkempt. Barney made a big fuss, said it was a waste of money, that we had more important things to think about. And he said that when we had our own house, we could spend money on beauty. A house of our own? I asked. Don't you have plans to buy an apartment? We used to. We were even looking at a few options, saving up for a down payment. But now Barney said we shouldn't buy anything because we'd have good real estate in the near future. I felt a chill go down my spine. Barnabas was already planning to get my house, and he hadn't even hidden it from his wife. Esmeralda, don't you think it's strange that he's talking so confidently about future real estate? My daughter turned to me. Mom, I think he means inheritance. I mean your house, which I will inherit someday. Someday, I repeated. You mean after I die? Yes, Esmeralda said, embarrassed. Though he never says so directly. He just says it's not worth spending money on rent or mortgages when there's the prospect of a house. I realized that Barnabas wasn't just planning for my death, he was already living in anticipation of it. He has canceled the purchase of his own home, is controlling family expenses, preparing for the moment when he can move into my house. And he convinces his wife that this is normal family planning. Esmeralda, what if I had lived another 20 years? Would you still be living in a rented apartment, waiting for your inheritance? I hadn't thought about that, she admitted. Barney speaks so confidently of the near future that she didn't finish her sentence, but I understood. Barnabas had insinuated to his wife that the inheritance was not long in coming. Perhaps he was even suggesting that my health was worse than it looked, and that I should not expect to live long. Mother, Esmeralda asked suddenly, are you really going to leave the house to me? Would you like to have it? Honestly, I don't know. On the one hand, it's my childhood home. It holds so many memories. On the other hand, it's so big, it's a lot of maintenance and expense. I think I'd be happier in a small, modern apartment. What does Barnabas think about it? He thinks a house is a great investment. He says that real estate in good neighborhoods only gets more expensive, that it's foolish to give it up. And he adds that if I don't need it, I can always sell it. That's the real deal. Barnabas wasn't planning on living in my house for the rest of his life. He planned to inherit it and sell it right away for a few $100,000 in cash. And he convinced Esmeralda that it was the best thing for their family budget. Would you want to sell the house if you inherited it? Esmeralda thought. I used to think that I would never do it. But now, Barney talks about it so often that I'm beginning to wonder. Maybe he's right, and it's more practical to get the money. I've seen my daughter's connection to the family home slowly erode. Barnabas has methodically convinced her that real estate is only a source of income, not a place to hold memories and family history. Tuesday night, as I was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. I looked out the window and saw Barnabas's familiar car. He was standing on the porch alone, without Esmeralda, and there was something determined, almost aggressive in his posture. I wiped my hands with a towel and went to open the door, sensing that this visit would be unlike any previous ones. Valori, good evening, Barnabas said, entering the house uninvited. We need to have a serious talk. There was none of the usual ostentatious politeness in his voice. His tone was harsh, demanding, as if he no longer thought it necessary to play the caring son-in-law. About what exactly? I asked, closing the door. About your future and the future of this family. We went into the living room. Barnabas did not sit down in the chair as he usually did during his visits. He stood in the middle of the room with his arms crossed over his chest, looking down at me with the look of a man about to dictate terms. Valerie, I think it's time to set the record straight, he said. We're both adults and we can talk straight, no offense. I'm listening. This house is too big for one old woman. You can't manage the household. Your health isn't what it used to be. Your memory is failing. It's time to accept reality and hand over responsibility for the family estate to someone who can take care of it. I sat down in my favorite chair by the fireplace and looked at him calmly. You mean you. Me and Esmeralda, Barnabas corrected. We are a young family. We have plans for the future, children who will be born someday. And you? Forgive me for being blunt, but at your age, you should not think about accumulating property, but about how to spend your remaining years with dignity. My remaining years, I repeated. How long do you think I have left to live? Barnabas was embarrassed for a moment, but he pulled himself together quickly. I didn't mean anything specific. It's just that at 70, it's wise to plan for the passing of property to the next generation. It's a normal practice in American families. What exactly are you suggesting? I propose we put the house in Esmeralda's name, or better yet, in my name, since I'm a man and have a better understanding of financial matters. Esmeralda is too gullible. She could be influenced by crooks. He paced the room, his movements barely restrained by nervousness. Valori, I know you don't trust me. You think I'm being selfish. But understand, I'm thinking of the family. Once the property is in my name, I can do the right thing with it. Sell this house and buy something more suitable for a young family. Or rent it out and get a steady income. So you're going to sell the house your wife grew up in. Esmeralda agrees, Barnabas said quickly. We've discussed it. She realizes that it is more practical to get the money than to maintain the old house. I doubted his words, remembering Saturday's conversation with my daughter. Esmeralda was far from being so certain. She was only beginning to doubt under her husband's influence. Where will I live after the house is sold? We'll find you a nice apartment in a retirement home or a small studio near us. As long as you're looked after, not left alone. Supervised. You mean under his control. Barnabas planned not only to take possession of my house, but also to isolate me, to deprive me of my independence, to turn me into a dependent old woman who could not interfere with his plans. Barnabas, what would happen if I refused your offer? His face darkened. Then I will have to take measures to protect the family's interests. What measures? Barnabas stopped in front of my chair and leaned toward me. An unpleasant glint appeared in his eyes. Valerie, I work for the health department. I know how to spot elder abuse, how to recognize the signs of dementia and incapacity. And I've seen enough to be concerned about your condition. Meaning? I mean, I can report you to social services for being a danger to yourself and others. I can tell them about you forgetting to turn off the gas, losing your medication, not recognizing your neighbors. I could bring witnesses to corroborate your inappropriate behavior. I felt a chill go through me. Barnabas threatened me openly, no longer under the guise of caring for my family. What witnesses? We'll find some. People will testify, especially when it's explained to them that an elderly person's safety is at stake. Neighbors, store clerks, even Esmeralda can tell of your oddities. Esmeralda would never perjure herself against her own mother. Who's talking about lying? Barnabas grinned. She already doubts your capacity. I'll just help her see what she won't admit yet. He straightened up and started pacing the room again. Valerie, the procedure for declaring incapacity in this state is quite simple. All it takes is a statement from a close relative, witness statements, and a psychiatrist's report. And I know doctors who won't scrutinize your condition too closely. You want to declare me insane. I want to protect you from yourself, he said with feigned sympathy. Older people often don't realize they need help. They cling to the illusion of independence and don't see the real problems. Barnabas stopped by the fireplace and turned to me. When you are declared incompetent, you will be appointed a guardian. As the husband of my only daughter, I will have priority, and then I can dispose of all your property in your best interests. My interests or your interests? In the interests of the family, he corrected himself. I'll sell the house, put you in a good boarding house where you'll get good care, and I'll put the money into safe investments that will last for years to come. As I listened to this monstrous plan, I realized that Barnabas had been thinking about it for months. He had studied all the legal details, prepared the ground, convinced his wife of my unreliability. Now all he had to do was wait for my consent or force it upon me. What if I agreed to put the house in your name right now? Then no incapacity proceedings would be necessary, Barnabas said, his voice softening. You'll be able to live out your days in your own home. I'll take my time selling, give you time to get used to the idea of moving. How much time? A year, maybe two. Depends. So he was still planning to get rid of me, just with softer methods, gradually convincing me to move, making life in the house unbearable until I asked him to send me to a boarding house. I got up from my chair and walked over to the antique dresser that stood against the wall opposite the fireplace. Barnabas was watching me with interest, probably thinking I was going to get the deeds to the house to give to him. I opened the top drawer of the dresser and pulled out a thick folder of papers. Barnabas took a step forward, but I gestured at him. Take your time. See what's in here first. I opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. They showed Barnabas in the company of a young woman I didn't recognize. They were sitting in a restaurant, holding hands, kissing. Other pictures showed the same couple leaving the hotel, walking in the park, entering a jewelry store. Barnabas' face turned white as chalk. Where'd you get this? From the hands of a private detective I hired 3 months ago, I replied calmly. When I realized you weren't just a greedy relative, but a liar, I put the photos on the table and pulled the typewritten sheets out of the folder. Here's the detective's report. Your lover's name is Jessica Riley. She's 28 years old, and she works as an administrator at the same hospital where you're an inspector. You've been dating for 8 months. You rent a room at the Mayflower Hotel every Tuesday and Thursday. Last week you gave her $300 worth of gold earrings. Barnabas tried to pull himself together. That doesn't prove anything. Photographs can be faked. They can, I agreed. But it's hard to fake videotapes. I took a flash drive out of the folder and showed it to Barnabas. Here are the hotel security tapes. The testimony of the porter who knows you by sight, copies of the bills you paid by credit card, and some other interesting stuff. I pulled out another document, a statement from the jewelry store. Turns out you didn't buy the earrings for your mistress with your own money, but with Esmeralda's. You used her credit card, which she had entrusted to you for family purchases. Barnabas was silent, staring at the papers spread out in front of me. All his aplomb evaporated, his cocky posture replaced by the confusion of a man who'd realized he'd walked into a trap. "What do you want?" he asked hoarsely. "Nothing yet," I replied, folding the papers neatly back into the folder. "I just want you to realize that the blackmail game can be a double-edged sword. You threatened to tell lies about my incapacity, and I could tell the truth about your cheating. That would destroy my family," Barnabas muttered. "Your family will be destroyed by your own actions. I'm just documenting what's already happening." I closed the folder and put it back in the dresser. "Now you can go, and don't come to my house with any more threats." After Barnabas left, I locked the front door, closed the curtains, and returned to the living room. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. The long months of tense waiting had finally culminated in an open confrontation, and I'd won the first round. But I knew it was only the beginning. I opened the dresser again and pulled out the file folder. This time I took my time reviewing them, remembering how and when I'd gathered this evidence. The path to the truth had been long and not always easy, but now I was grateful for my caution and mistrust. It had begun 4 months ago, when Barnabas's behavior had become suspicious. It was the first time I'd ever seriously considered that my fears might have some basis in reality. Before that, I had written off his obsessive attention to my property as greed and ill-mannered, but gradually I realized that I was dealing with a man who was making an elaborate plan to seize someone else's property. The impetus came from a conversation with a neighbor, Mrs. Carruthers. She had come to see me early in the summer to discuss plans for the improvement of our street, and in passing she mentioned that she had seen Barnabas outside my house during the days when I had been to the doctor's office. "He was walking around the house, looking in the windows," said Mrs. Carruthers, "drinking tea in my kitchen. I thought you'd asked him to check something." But then it struck me as odd that he didn't go inside, but was looking around the house from the outside. I thanked my neighbor for her attentiveness, but inside I felt cold. It seemed that Barnabas had come to me secretly, in my absence, and was examining my property. Perhaps he was assessing the condition of the roof, the foundation, other elements of the house that affect its market value. That's when I remembered another suspicious episode. A few weeks ago, Barnabas had offered to help me trim the hedges. I agreed, but then I noticed that he was spending more time not with the secateurs, but near the windows of the house, trying to look inside. When I asked what he was doing, Barnabas explained that he was checking the condition of the window frames and wondering if they needed painting. And there was an earlier occasion when he was supposedly looking in my shed for gardening tools, but I caught him rummaging through boxes of Christmas decorations. To my perplexed question, he said he wanted to see if there were any vintage items among the toys that might be of collector's value. All these little things individually seemed harmless, but collectively they formed a picture of a systematic examination of my possessions. Barnabas was making an inventory of everything in the house that might be of material value. After talking to Mrs. Carruthers, I decided it was time to act more decisively. The following Monday, I drove downtown and went to the agency of private investigators, Madison and Associates. I chose this firm because it specialized in family investigations and had an impeccable reputation. I received Mr. Madison himself, a man in his 50s, with graying temples and attentive gray eyes. He listened to my story of suspicions about my son-in-law without interrupting me or asking unnecessary questions. At the end of our conversation, he said that such cases were quite common in his practice. "Mrs. Craddock, unfortunately, the greed of relatives is one of the most common sources of family conflicts," explained Mr. Madison, "especially when it comes to older people who own expensive real estate. Some family members begin to view older relatives as a temporary obstacle to inheritance." He suggested a full investigation of Barnabas's activities, trace his movements, check his financial transactions, see if he was conducting any hidden activities that might explain his persistent interest in my estate. Sometimes people who are planning a real estate scam will first look into the lifestyle of the potential victim, the detective said. They find out when she's home, who visits her, where documents are kept. It could be preparation for theft or forgery. The investigation lasted 3 months. Mr. Madison worked discreetly, using methods that could not alert the subject of surveillance. Barnabas had no idea he was being watched by professionals. The first results came a month later. The detective discovered that Barnabas was making regular visits to the Mayflower Hotel downtown, always in the company of the same woman. At first, Mr. Madison thought it might be work-related, perhaps business meetings or appointments. But further observation revealed that the nature of these meetings was distinctly personal. Jessica Riley turned out to be the administrator of St. Anne's Hospital, where Barnabas was conducting inspections as an employee of the health department. 28 years old, single, living alone in a rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. According to colleagues, an attractive and outgoing young woman who enjoys the attention of men. Mr. Madison found out that the affair began 8 months ago when Barnabas came to the hospital for a routine inspection of the sanitary condition of the food service. Jessica was assigned as his escort, and a relationship developed between the two. At first, they met occasionally, then the meetings became regular. Barnabas rented a hotel room every Tuesday and Thursday, telling his wife he was working late or traveling around the region on business. Jessica lied at work, too, telling coworkers she had a serious admirer but not naming him. The detective provided me not only with photos, but also a detailed account of their meetings. Barnabas spent significant sums on his mistress, paid expensive dinners in restaurants, bought jewelry and clothes, even rented a separate apartment for her in a more prestigious area, although officially she was still listed at the old address. The most shocking revelation was that Barnabas financed his romantic adventures not from his own funds, but from the family budget. He used Esmeralda's credit card, which she had entrusted to him to buy groceries and pay bills. My daughter had no idea that her money was being spent on gifts for another woman. Mr. Madison got copies of bank statements that showed the extent of the spending. In the last 6 months, Barnabas had spent almost $10,000 of the family budget on Jessica. On his modest government salary, that's a lot of money. Your son-in-law leads a double life, the detective explained during our last meeting. And this double life requires a significant financial investment. Perhaps that's why he's so insistent on your property. He needs the money to support his mistress. But I realized it wasn't just about money. Barnabas was planning a future with Jessica, and Esmeralda was just a stepping stone to his inheritance. Perhaps after he took possession of my house, he was going to divorce his daughter and marry his mistress. Mr. Madison also provided me with tapes of conversations that were recorded with a directional microphone during the couple's meetings in restaurants. Barnabas told Jessica about his plans for my house, called me an old fool who will soon give up, and promised his mistress that they would soon have enough money to buy their own house in a good neighborhood. These notes were the most convincing evidence of Barnabas's true intentions. He wasn't just dreaming of an inheritance, he was actively planning how to get it, and had even discussed it with a stranger. Now, going through the documents in the folder, I had a strange feeling. On the one hand, it was painful to realize that the man I had welcomed into my home as a family member was actually a traitor and a liar. On the other hand, I felt satisfied that I was able to figure out his plans in time and prepare a defense. Tomorrow, I had to make the most difficult decision of all, whether to tell Esmeralda the truth about her husband. I knew it would break my daughter's heart, shatter her notions of family happiness, force her to reevaluate her whole life. But silence would mean betraying her and indulging Barnabas's plans. I put the folder back in the dresser and locked the drawer. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter in this story. The next day, Barnabas showed up at my door at 11 in the morning. I saw him pull up in front of the house, but he didn't get out of the car for several minutes, as if he were gathering his courage. When he finally decided to call, his face looked gaunt, and his eyes showed the sleepless night. "We need to talk," he said without greeting when I opened the door. "I thought we had it all figured out yesterday." "Valerie, you don't understand the situation. Let's discuss this calmly, like adults." His voice lacked the confidence and aggression of yesterday. Barnabas had come to ask, not to demand, and that changed the balance of power between us. We went into the living room. This time he sat in a chair, not pacing the room as he had done the day before. His posture expressed the resignation of a man who realized he was in a desperate situation. "Valerie, I admit that I behaved inappropriately yesterday," Barnabas began, his hands folded in his lap. "Emotions got the better of me, and I said things I shouldn't have said. But understand, I was really thinking of the good of the family." "The good of the family," I repeated. "Interesting interpretation of cheating on your wife and stealing the family money." He wrinkled his nose as if my words hurt him physically. "It's not what you think. Jessica isn't just a lover. I love her." "And you don't love Esmeralda?" Barnabas was silent, searching for words. "Esmeralda is complicated. We married for mutual affection, but the real love came later with Jessica. I didn't plan it. It just happened." "It happened," I repeated sarcastically. "And for that love, you were willing to declare me crazy and steal my house?" "Not steal," he countered, "to get what Esmeralda would inherit someday anyway, just a little sooner." I stared at him in amazement. Barnabas was still trying to justify his actions, to present the fraud as a concern for the family. "Barnabas, do you realize you are planning to commit a crime? False statements of incapacity, forgery of documents, embezzlement of other people's property. You can get jail time for that." "I know," he said quietly. "But I was desperate. Jessica wants me to take action, and I don't have the money to give her a decent life. She's used to a certain level of comfort. With your wife's money," I reminded him. "It's only temporary," Barnabas said hastily. "I planned to return it as soon as I had access to the family estate." He couldn't say, "as soon as I took possession of your house," but the meaning was clear. Barnabas saw my property as a source of funds to support his mistress. "What would become of Esmeralda in your plans?" Barnabas averted his gaze. "I thought, perhaps in time, we would divorce peacefully. We'd divide our assets and each of us would make our own lives." "So you were going to leave your wife after you got the inheritance through her?" "Not leave her, but, give her the freedom to find a man who really loves her." I shook my head. Barnabas was even trying to present his betrayal as an honorable act. "How much of the inheritance would Esmeralda herself receive?" "Half, of course. I wasn't going to deceive her." "Half of the house you plan to sell at once?" Barnabas nodded, not realizing that he was giving himself away even more. "Money is more practical than real estate. Esmeralda could buy a small apartment with her half, and you could use your half to buy a big house for your new family." "Something like that," he agreed reluctantly. I got up and went to the window. It was drizzling outside. Gray clouds blocked out the sun, and the whole world seemed dull and cold. It was about the same way I felt listening to my son-in-law's revelations. The man we had thought of as family for 3 years had turned out to be a calculating crook. "Barnabas, when were you planning on telling Esmeralda about Jessica?" "After, after the estate was settled, so she'd have a financial cushion during the divorce." "How thoughtful of you." He didn't hear the sarcasm in my voice, or chose to ignore it. "Valori, I realize my methods were wrong, but my motives were honorable. I didn't mean to offend anyone." "No offense intended," I repeated. I just plan to steal my mother-in-law's house, cheat my wife, and spend the family money on a mistress. That's very considerate of you. Barnabas squirmed in his chair. All right, let's say I was wrong. But now we can find a compromise. I'm willing to reconsider my plans. What kind of compromise are you suggesting? Let's forget about writing the house in my name. Let the will remain intact, and Esmeralda will inherit after, uh, well, in due course. I won't rush things any further. And in return? In return, you forget what you found out about Jessica. You don't tell Esmeralda. I turned to him. So you want to keep lying to your wife? Not cheat, but, give her time. Maybe our relationship with Esmeralda can still be repaired. If she finds out about the affair now, it will destroy the family forever. The family has already been destroyed by your actions. But it can still be saved, Barnabas exclaimed, finally showing real emotion. I'm ready to break up with Jessica, to return to a normal family life. Just give me a chance. I looked at him carefully. There was desperation in Barnabas's voice, but no sincerity. He wasn't asking for a chance because he was remorseful, but because he realized that his plans had failed, and now he had to find a way to minimize the damage. Barnabas, are you really ready to break up with Jessica? If it's the only way to keep this family together, yes. How will you explain your decision to her? He thought for a moment. I'll tell her that my wife suspects something and that we need to stop seeing each other for a while. Temporarily? Well, or permanently, depending on the circumstances. That's the true Barnabas. Even when he promised to break up with his mistress, he left himself a loophole to get back to his old life. And the money you spent on Jessica? I'll get it back. I'll take out a loan, get a new job. Esmeralda will never know I spent it. In 8 months, you've spent almost $10,000 of the family's money. At your salary, it would take years to pay that back. Barnabas lowered his head. I'll find a way. The important thing is that you give me time. Time for what? To think of a new way to get my house? No, he said sharply. I swear I'll never lay claim to your property again. Your oaths are worthless, I said. You've been swearing fidelity to Esmeralda for 3 years while you've been having an affair. Barnabas realized that his attempts to bargain were getting him nowhere. He rose from his chair and came to me. Valori, what do you want? What are your terms? There are no terms, I replied. There is a simple truth. Esmeralda has a right to know that her husband is cheating on her and stealing the family money. But that would ruin her life. Her life is already ruined. She just doesn't know it yet. Barnabas took a step back. If you tell her, I'll deny it. I'll say you made up that story to keep us apart. I have proof. Photos can be faked, tapes can be edited, and the bills. I met an old acquaintance, bought her a gift as a courtesy. Nothing criminal. I realized that Barnabas was ready to lie to the end, to deny the obvious and accuse me of slander. But his nervousness betrayed his true state of mind. He realized that there was too much evidence, and it would be very difficult to convince Esmeralda of his innocence. Then let's see who Esmeralda will believe, I said. Her mother or her liar husband. Barnabas stood in the middle of the drawing room, his eyes slowly extinguishing the last hope that he might escape exposure. After Barnabas left, I sat in the living room for a long time, staring at the rain outside the window. Droplets dripped down the glass in fanciful patterns, and I pondered how best to deal with the information I'd received. The decision to tell Esmeralda the truth about her husband had not been easy, but there were no alternatives. Silence would mean betraying my own daughter. I could not watch Esmeralda live under the illusion of a happy marriage, unaware that her husband was deceiving her and planning to leave her in the future. Every day of postponement would cause her additional pain when the truth would come out sooner or later anyway. Besides, Barnabas was not going to give up his plans. Today's conversation showed me that he was only looking for ways to postpone the exposure, but he did not intend to change his behavior. Sooner or later, he would make another attempt to take over my house, perhaps even more sophisticated and dangerous. I picked up the phone and dialed Esmeralda's number. The short beeps buzzed for a long time, and I thought my daughter wouldn't answer. But finally, I heard a familiar voice. Mom, what's wrong? Esmeralda, I need to talk to you. Can you come over? Now? What's so urgent? I hesitated, not knowing how to explain the importance of the conversation without giving it away. It's a family matter. It's better to discuss it in person. Okay, my daughter agreed after a short pause. I've just finished my work. I'll be there in half an hour. While Esmeralda drove, I made tea and took out a box of cookies from the cupboard, which she had loved since childhood. These simple actions helped me focus and prepare for a difficult conversation. I realized that the next hour would be a pivotal time in my daughter's life, and I wanted to create the most comfortable environment for her. At the appointed time, Esmeralda's car pulled up in front of the house. She walked quickly down the driveway to the porch, shivering in the cold rain. When I opened the door, I saw that my daughter looked worried. Apparently, my call had disturbed her. Mom, are you feeling okay? She asked, taking off her coat. I'm fine. I'm worried about you, though. Esmeralda looked at me in surprise. What do you mean? Let's go into the living room and talk. We settled down by the fireplace. Esmeralda sat in her favorite chair, the same one in which she had once read school books and later told me about her first novels. She was now a grown woman of 35, but in that chair she still seemed like my little girl, to be protected from the cruelty of the outside world. Esmeralda, what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to hear, I began, but you need to know it. Mom, you're scaring me. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath and decided to be blunt and direct. It's about Barnabas. It's about what he's doing behind your back. My daughter's face tensed. What's he doing? He's cheating on you. He has a mistress he's been seeing for 8 months. Esmeralda turned pale and leaned back in her chair as if she had been physically struck. That's impossible. Barney is not capable of such a thing. Unfortunately, he is, I said softly. And I have proof. What kind of proof? I stood up and pulled a folder of detective files from the dresser. Esmeralda stared at the thick folder in disbelief, as if she couldn't believe it contained information about her family life. Mom, where did you get this? I hired a private investigator. Barnabas's behavior over the past few months had made me very suspicious, so I decided to test my hunches. I opened the folder and showed my daughter the first photograph. Barnabas and a strange woman sitting at a table in a restaurant, holding hands. Esmeralda took the picture with trembling fingers and looked at it for a long time. Who is she? Her daughter asked quietly. Jessica Riley, the administrator of St. Anne's Hospital. She's 28 years old. I showed the following pictures. The couple at the hotel entrance, in the park, in the jewelry store. In each picture, Barnabas looked relaxed and happy, not at all like someone who is just hanging out with a coworker or casual acquaintance. They meet every Tuesday and Thursday, I explained. They have a room at the Mayflower Hotel. Barnabas tells you he's working late or traveling on business. Esmeralda flipped through the photos in silence. Her face gradually lost color, and her eyes were filled with the pain of a man who knows his life is falling apart. And that's not all, I continued, pulling out the bank statements. In the last 8 months, Barnabas had spent almost $10,000 on Jessica. Your money. My money? He uses your credit card to pay for restaurants, hotels, and gifts to his mistress. I showed my daughter copies of checks and bank transactions. Esmeralda recognized her card number and dates she should have remembered as her husband's business travel days. Mom, I don't understand, she whispered. Why is he doing this? We were happy. I don't know if you were happy, but Barnabas has been planning to divorce you for quite some time now. Divorce? I told my daughter what I'd heard from Barnabas himself about his plans to inherit through his wife and then leave her for Jessica. Esmeralda listened without interrupting, and with every word I spoke, her face grew more and more wan. But why didn't he tell me directly that he wanted a divorce? She asked me when I had finished my story. Because divorce without inheritance was not in his plans. He had to have my house first before he could think about his own happiness. Esmeralda put the cup of tea on the table and covered her eyes with her palms. Mother, I feel like a fool. How could I not see the obvious? You trusted your husband. That's normal in a family relationship. But there had to be signs, changes in behavior, moods, habits. I sat down next to my daughter and held her hand. There were signs. You told me about them last Saturday. Controlling my spending, the strange talk of inheritance, trying to convince you I was incapacitated. You just weren't connecting the dots. Did you? I was less emotionally involved in your relationship. It was easier for me to look at the situation soberly. Esmeralda raised her head and looked at me. Mom, what do we do now? How do I live with that knowledge? It's your decision, I said. But I think the first thing to do is to talk to Barnabas, to confront him with the facts and find out what he intends to do. What if he denies it? We have irrefutable evidence. Denial is useless. The daughter took the pictures in her hands again and scrutinized them carefully. You know, Mom, the most hurtful thing is not that he cheated. The most hurtful thing is that he cheated with such a young woman. She's 4 years younger than me. Esmeralda, it's not about age. It's that Barnabas lied to you and betrayed your trust. Yes, but it still hurts to know you've been replaced by a younger version. I realized that my daughter was feeling not only the pain of the betrayal, but also a blow to her self-esteem. Every woman in this situation begins to question her attractiveness and worth. Esmeralda, the problem is not you, it's Barnabas. You're a beautiful woman, a faithful wife, a caring daughter. If he doesn't appreciate that, then he doesn't deserve you. The daughter smiled weakly. Thank you, Mother, although it's hard for me to believe it now. We talked for another half an hour about what had happened and how best to proceed. Esmeralda gradually came to herself from the first shock and began to think practically about divorce, division of property, the need to find their own housing. Mom, can I stay with you for the first time? She asked before leaving. Of course, this is your home. You can always come back here. Thank you. I'll talk to Barney tomorrow, and then I'll decide what to do next. After my daughter left, I sat in the empty living room for a long time. The hardest part of the conversation was over, but there were still many difficult moments ahead. Barnabas would not give up without a fight, and divorce promised to be a painful process. But I was sure I had done the right thing. Esmeralda had a right to know the truth, however painful it might be. The next 2 days passed in anxious anticipation. Esmeralda did not call, and I did not know if she had had a conversation with Barnabas. I tried to do the usual things, cooking, cleaning, gardening, but my thoughts kept returning to my daughter and what she was going through. Thursday night, as I was preparing dinner, the phone rang. It was Esmeralda, and I could tell from her voice that I had spoken to my husband. Mom, can I come over to your house? Right now? Sure, what's wrong? I'll tell you when I see you. I'm on my way. Half an hour later, my daughter stood on my doorstep with 2 large bags and tearful eyes. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept for several nights in a row. It's over, she said as she crossed the threshold. I left him. We went into the living room, and Esmeralda collapsed into an armchair. I poured her tea and waited patiently until she was ready to tell me what had happened. I showed him the pictures last night, she began. At first, he tried to deny it. He said the pictures were doctored, that Jessica was just a coworker he was discussing work issues with. And what did you say? I showed him the bank statements. When he saw the amount spent on gifts, his face changed. He realized there was no use in denying it. Esmeralda sipped her tea and continued. Then he changed his tactics. He began to apologize, saying that it was a moment of weakness, that he himself does not understand how it happened. He swore he'd break up with Jessica and become a good husband. Did you believe him? I wanted to believe him. Mom, do you understand? 3 years of marriage, the plans we shared, the house we rented together. I'd like to think we can fix all that. I nodded. I realized that Esmeralda was clinging to the hope of saving the marriage, even after learning of her husband's betrayal. But then I asked him about your house, about the plans he had for the inheritance. And what did he say? At first, he tried to avoid answering, said it had nothing to do with our marital problems. But when I insisted, he confessed. Esmeralda put down her cup and looked at me. Mom, it turns out he was really planning to divorce me right after he got the inheritance. He was going to marry Jessica and buy her a house with the money from your estate sale. Did he just say that? Not exactly straight, but when I had him up against the wall, he pretty much admitted everything, said that our marriage had long ago become a formality, that he felt trapped, that with Jessica he was truly happy. The daughter covered her eyes and took a deep breath. You know what hurt the most? Not even the cheating, but the fact that he thought our marriage was a mistake. All those 3 years that I thought were happy were torture for him. Esmeralda, maybe he was saying that out of spite to justify his behavior. No, Mother, I saw his face. He was sincere. He finally stopped playing the role of loving husband and showed his true feelings for me. It hurt me to hear my daughter berate herself for failing to keep her husband. In these situations, women almost always blame themselves, not the one who betrayed them. What did he say about the money? The $10,000 he spent on his mistress? He promised to pay her back, though it's understandable that on his salary, it would take years. That's assuming he really wants to pay it back and not find new ways to spend it. Esmeralda stood up and went to the window. I packed my things this morning and left. I told him I was going to file for divorce and I didn't want to see him again. How did he react? He tried to hold on to me. Not out of love, of course, but for practical reasons. He realizes that without me, it's going to be hard for him to rent an apartment, pay his bills. Jessica earns less than he does, and it's going to be even harder to support her. So, even at the time of the breakup, he was thinking about money? That's right. Barney asked for time to sort out his finances. He offered to live with the three of us for a while, until he found a solution to the housing problem. I gasped in outrage. He offered to let you share an apartment with his mistress? Can you imagine? Esmeralda grinned bitterly. And at the same time, he said that it was a temporary measure, that he hadn't decided yet who he wanted to be with. And what did you say? That the decision has already been made by me, and that if he does not decide within a week, I myself will file divorce papers and demand compensation for the money spent on a mistress. The daughter came back to the chair and sat down. Mom, I want to stay with you until I find my own place. It won't take long, I promise. Esmeralda, this is your home. You can stay here as long as you want. I don't want to be a burden. I'm a grown woman. I have to manage on my own. You're not a burden. You're my daughter. And in times of need, a family should be together. We hugged, and I could feel her shoulders shaking from holding back tears. Now Esmeralda was like that little girl who used to come to me for comfort after arguments with her classmates or failures at school. "Mom, how did you know something was wrong with Barney?" she asked after she'd calmed down a little. Intuition and life experience. When a person takes an overly insistent interest in someone else's property, it's always suspicious. "I was blind," Esmeralda sighed. "I didn't see the obvious. You were in love. Lovers always see more good in their partner than is really there. And now I feel like a complete fool. How can you live with someone for 3 years and not know their true character?" I took my daughter's hand. "Barnabas played the part skillfully. He studied your weaknesses, told you what you wanted to hear, played the perfect husband. Men like that can wear a mask for years." But there had to be signs. There were signs, and you noticed them. Remember when you complained about his control over money? The strange talk about my inheritance? You just didn't want to see it as a threat. Esmeralda nodded. "Yes, I found excuses for his behavior. I thought he was being practical, caring about our future. But he cared about his future with another woman. We spent the whole evening talking. Esmeralda told me details of her family life that had seemed insignificant to her before, but now had taken on new meaning. Barnabas turned out to be a master of psychological manipulation who gradually subjugated his wife to his will, making her question her own judgment. The next morning, the daughter called work and took a few days off. She needed time to recover and deal with the practicalities of divorce. We agreed that she would first go to a lawyer and find out her rights, and then proceed according to legal options. Saturday morning, as we were having breakfast in the kitchen, Barnabas's car pulled up to the house. Esmeralda tensed when she saw her husband through the window. "He's coming this way," she said. "Do you want me to keep him out?" "No, let him come in. It's better to clear things up." Barnabas knocked on the door, and I went to open it. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him, unshaven, puffy-eyed, in crumpled clothes. "Valori, I need to talk to Esmeralda." "She's in the kitchen." We walked to where her daughter sat at the table with a cup of coffee in her hands. At the sight of her husband, she didn't get up and say hello, just nodded coldly. "Essie, we need to talk about this," Barnabas said, sitting down across from her. "There is nothing to discuss. I've made my decision. But you won't give me a chance to explain myself. Yes, I was wrong, but people are entitled to make mistakes. 8 months of infidelity is not a mistake. It's a way of life," Esmeralda replied coldly. Barnabas tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. "Essie, I'm ready to change everything. I'll break up with Jessica and be the perfect husband. Just give me a chance." "What happens when you meet the next Jessica?" He couldn't answer that question, so Esmeralda continued. "Barney, you said yourself that our marriage has long since become a formality. Why torture each other?" I said it in a fit of anger. "I didn't think you'd take it seriously." "What part of what you said wasn't true? That you're seeing your mistress? That you were planning to divorce me after inheritance? That you're spending my money on gifts for another woman?" Barnabas was silent, realizing that it was useless to deny the facts. At last he raised his head and looked at his wife. "Essie, what if I returned the money? I'd get some extra work, make up for the damage. Would that change your mind?" "No," the daughter said firmly. "It's not about money, it's about trust. You've lost it irrevocably." Barnabas tried for another half hour to persuade Esmeralda, but she was adamant. Finally, he realized that further talk was pointless. "All right," he said, rising from the table. "But know this, you're the one who destroyed our family. I was ready to make amends, and you didn't give me a chance." "It was your actions that destroyed the family," Esmeralda said calmly, "and I'm just drawing conclusions from what happened." There was silence in the house after Barnabas left. Esmeralda sat at the table, staring out the window, while I put away the dishes and thought about how quickly life could change. Just a week ago, my daughter had considered herself a happily married woman, and now she was divorced and looking for a new path. Mom, Esmeralda said suddenly, thank you. For what? For opening my eyes. If it weren't for you, I would have lived in illusions for a long time. Don't you regret knowing the truth? Daughter thought, I regret wasting 3 years with the wrong man, but I don't regret knowing his true face. Better a painful truth than a sweet lie. In the evening, after Esmeralda went to bed in her old room, I sat in the living room for a long time, reflecting on the events that had taken place. The last few months had taught me an important lesson. Even people who are close to you may not be who they say they are. Barnabas had spent 3 years playing the role of a caring son-in-law, but in reality, he had planned to rob me and abandon my daughter. Fortunately, my caution and mistrust helped me recognize his plans in time. If I had been persuaded to sign the house over to him, I would have lost both my shelter and the opportunity to protect Esmeralda from his deception. Now that the danger was over, I felt strangely relieved. The house was still mine, my daughter was near and safe, and Barnabas was out of our lives forever. The truth had been painful, but it had freed us from our illusions and given us a chance to start anew. I looked at Harold's portrait on the mantelpiece and mentally thanked my late husband for teaching me to be strong and not to trust people blindly. Those qualities had helped me protect my family from betrayal and preserve what he and I had built over the years.